Hi, I'm Iwan Fox and welcome to the latest 4BR Review podcast, where I'm joined by my colleague Chris Thomas to chat about what has, what is and what will be going on in the brass band world. For this latest episode, we are looking back at the National Championship final at the Royal Albert Hall, where 19 bands battled to become the 2025 Champion Band of Great Britain on Edward Gregson's Symphony in 2 movements. Tonight's programme is therefore in 3 parts. The first looking back at the contest and where we think it was possibly won and lost. The second and third parts will broaden the context. The first by looking in appreciation at the Desford model of banding and whether or not it offers a blueprint for others to follow. Finally, the contest itself and whether or not after the positive evidence of the weekend is change desperately needed or just a few more tweaks in a new direction. We will be looking to see what you think, of course. Your views and opinions are key to that, so please be part of the live discussion by posting your comments in the YouTube comments box on the screen, which will appear by magic. There it is. So, hi Chris. It's certainly our annual trip to London was one to remember. A long old day and night, but one that I think a lot of people will be talking about for some time.
Yeah, evening, Ewan. It was a long day, wasn't it? It was a tiring day, but most of all, it was an excellent contest, wasn't it? I mean, it was a terrific day's entertainment, fabulous piece, which I think was central to all of that, and an intriguing contest. Lots of debate, which we'll talk about shortly, and a lot to cover, I think, this evening.
Yeah, we got an hour to get it all in. I think hopefully we will do it. And we've had lots of people already getting in contact with us to offer their opinions. So first things first then, and Desford's remarkable success. 34 years after they last ruled the Albert Hall, back in their purple patch of success in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And to kick off really about what we are going to discuss, it's been wonderful. Edward Gregson was with us in the a number of times throughout the day. Yeah. And he's got back in contact just to thank really the bands with some of his thoughts. And it says on there, I would like to thank all the bands and their conductors for their incredibly hard work in preparing their performance of my symphony in 2 movements. No composer would take such a dedication lightly, and to have so many fine performances of one's music at such an iconic venue as the Royal Albert Hall gave me huge satisfaction. I was so pleased that after all the pre-competition concerns about the work being too modern, and I think it's in length, in the event, no band's performance was over 19 minutes and the majority were under 18 minutes. We'll talk about that a bit later. It proved quite the opposite in terms of I've lost word. In terms of the appreciation of my music from both bands and audience. It was also gratifying to see such a good audience throughout the day. I hope the band will continue to be as adventurous in every aspect of these musical horizons, including encouraging a new generation of composers to have their works chosen for this occasion. If so, I'm sure bands will continue to have their place and impact on the wider musical world. Brass bands are alive and well, he says. And Eddie was alive and well and enjoying himself.
He certainly was.
He was. It was wonderful to see him there, surrounded, I think, by a number. It was also interesting. There were fellow composers around with him as well. Great movers and shakers from other parts of the banding world. So I think it really did show, and there are concerns about the national final, it can still attract that interest, that global interest in many ways.
Yeah, and again, fabulous that Eddie's giving brass bands that kind of advocacy. I mean, we know he's been hugely important over the years and continues to be hugely important. I think he had Richard Blackford with him, who's just written the new piece Orbital that we've talked about before. First time at the Albert Hall for the national finals for Richard Blackford, I believe. But that kind of advocacy is invaluable. You just cannot put a price on how important Eddie's influence is in that respect.
Well, As going back to the contest itself, then it was a surprise, Desford's win. I think that was it, but not necessarily a major shock. There's that wonderful trophy that we were all playing for. Great picture there taken by Craig Chapman, of course, who does all the photography for 4Barsrest. And as we say, I say that it was not a major shock because Desford have been a top-class band for so many, many years. But they are the first Grand Shield band. The first is 1995 in Leyland to win the contest. Yeah. And in a way, 3 of the top 6 bands will be at the Grand Shield in Birmingham next year. So in that respect, you could just say that they were the surprise winner. But I think before we talk about them, let's go back and have a look at, first of all, Eddie, as he said, about the reception that his test piece actually had. There were major challenges. It was a major work. As I said, it was substantial, very much so there, and really did test the bands and as well as the conductors in full. It was a worthy test to try and decide who was going to be crowned the 2025 champion band of Great Britain.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fabulous test, and I think one of the main reasons for that is that we had a piece in the Symphony in 2 movements which doesn't just test the band and the players technically, it tests them intellectually as well. I mean, this is a piece that is so well crafted, so well written, and it's a true symphony in that respect, and I think it takes a lot of thought. One of the fascinating things about the various opinions that have been flying around since the results on Saturday is that I've heard people talking about performances from the perspective of technique, of stamina, of accuracy. And then I've heard other people talking about performances from the point of view of interpretation, of presentation, of the shaping of the piece and how the performance was welded together. Now, you know, we've talked about test pieces a lot on recent podcasts, Ewan, haven't we? And, you know, one of the things that we've talked about endlessly is the fact that test pieces have just become a long procession of technical tests with little to challenge intellectually or musically. And I think this piece defies that. And what we get as a result of that is a fascinating contest with fascinating contrasts of performances and fascinating contrasts of opinions afterwards as well, because my goodness me, there have been some wide-ranging opinions, I think, from people after the contest took place on Saturday. But it's the quality of the work, it's the quality of the piece that's given us that and gave us the terrific contest that we had on Saturday.
Well, it's interesting. We talked a little bit earlier about there were a number of composers who were there. So Carl Jenkins was there, of course. Yeah. Talking about a composer who's made a global impact, isn't it? Nobody, I don't think it was made such as he has over the years. There was, as you say, Richard Blackford was there, yeah. Peter Graham was there. There was all sort of composer, Robin Stevens, who's just been introduced really back into the brass banding world. He was there as well. And one of them was Gavin Higgins, of course. Yes. He popped into the box with us, and he referred to, he's just sent a text message. He says, "It was so refreshing to be able to hear a well-constructed and well-written set piece for the first time in over a decade. Why has it taken the organisers and music panel so long to choose a piece of this quality?"
Well, that's a good question, Ewan, isn't it? And you know, I think we could talk about that. In fact, we could dedicate the whole podcast to that question. Actually, we could talk about it for a long time. But in saying that, I think we've got there. However we've done it, we've got there, and I think, you know, we've had a contest where we've heard a fantastic piece of music and we've seen the benefits of that at the end of it, and let's take that as a marker. Let's take that as a sign of hope for the future, that this gives everybody reason to think hard and long and carefully about the pieces that we use for our major contests in the future, because I think Saturday proved a huge point, Ewan, quite honestly. And I think in many ways, we won't blow our own trumpets here, but you know, I think it really proves what we've been talking about largely all these weeks, that we need quality pieces because they create quality contests. That's the bottom line.
It is, and I think when you say that, the point that Edward Gregson said about the timings with it, and I think other people have said this in other places also, so we shouldn't take all the credit with regards to it, is that if you got 18 minutes of quality music, then the time does fly, you know, really. If you've got 18 minutes of padding and virtuosic gymnastics, etc., it can become, a very tiring day very, very quickly. And what we had with Eddie's piece was very much of the former. And, it was fascinating, as you said, where the way in which the approach was done by especially the conductors. Some of them went for, as you said, almost a constrained approach, with especially in terms of pacing. With relevance of the tempo markings, there was 3 major tempo markers. They were all in relation to themselves, and also the textures, and the dynamics. Other ones took it a bit more literally, less literally, and went for the adjectival approach. And as Eddie had said previously, it's a piece that he doesn't usually use adjectives to describe what he wants from bands. And it was very interesting to hear some bands and conductors opt for that approach, and other ones opt for the other one. And that then linked into what the judges themselves were looking for. And the judges, of course, for this competition made for interesting reading beforehand. But, of course, we had Ian Bousfield, Stephen Cobb and Robert Whiffin. Two of them very experienced brass band adjudicators. They've been at the Albert Hall on a number of occasions. The other in Ian Bousfield, world-class. And I take that without a shadow of a doubt. Absolute world-class brass musician. Somebody who has worked with the greatest symphony orchestras, somebody who has been conducted by the greatest symphonic conductors and orchestral conductors in the world. So nobody should be able to complain about the makeup of that adjudication panel. And also the thoughts and the way in which they actually approach their task. Because when it came to the results, it was interesting to see, both in terms of pacing, that the bands that came in the prizes, especially first and second, I think there were about 2 or 3 seconds between them in terms of duration. And then in terms of the way in which they approached the work, especially Desford and Black Dyke, they were very much cut from, and in a way Flowers and Whitburn, cut from the same cloth. Yeah,
they were. I just want to come back to the point about the timings, Ewan, because there was a lot said about the fact that it was a 19-minute piece. And I mean, looking at the score, actually, it says duration 18 minutes in the score. But the reality is that it all became something of a fallacy, all this debate about how long the piece was, because the reality is that most of the performances toward the top were 17 minutes and something. Now, frankly, that's not any different, or hardly any different, to some of the test pieces that we've heard in recent years. So
even at the British Open.
Even at the British Open. So the length of the piece, actually, all of the debate about the length of the piece, as far as I'm concerned, was completely irrelevant. The reality is, as I think I probably said, and as we talked about on the last podcast, was that I would rather listen to 18 or 19 minutes of a high-quality piece such as the symphony than I would 15 minutes of a piece where the last 2 or 3 minutes is simply superfluous. So, so again, it comes back to quality. This is a piece, 18 minutes, 19 minutes, whatever. This is a piece that sustains your attention from the first note to the last note.
It's interesting then, you were saying you were in the hall, of course, listening to all the performances. We were perched in our grand tier box opposite the champagne bar.
Were.
As we should be, as we
not much champagne, mind you, but never.
No, none of those prices. There's not going to be champagne in the Albert Hall. That's the one thing that I have to say I do rail against, is that champagne prices have gone up over the years for people like me. Anyway, that's where we were sat in the hall. The judges' tent, of course, is down on the main auditorium where sumo wrestling will be taking place later on this week. So they're just about in the same place where most probably a 25-stone sumo wrestler is going to be pushed. Heavyweights of a different kind will be tackling for a major prize there. So we have to say there's a listening experience. It's very different at the Royal Albert Hall. Of course, it's the way in which it's actually shaped traditionally. Of course, it does boom a little bit, or more than a little bit in times and places. So and the first part is Malcolm Wood has come back to us, regular, of course. Malcolm, saying, being circular, you get a different musical experience wherever you sit in the Royal Albert Hall. The reaction has been surprise, but not for the 3 judges who sit in the straight line back from the stage. And it's very important. Right. They are quite a way back, but they are in, I would say, direct line of fire. So again, it's not they possibly got maybe the best seat in the house. Possibly needs to be a bit further forward for me, I would suggest.
Yeah,
but
but interestingly,
it's a good one though.
They're sitting lower than many other people as well, apart from the
Yep.
people that are sitting on the deck, which, okay, there's a certain number of people that are sitting around the judge's box. Most of the other people in the hall are sitting at a higher level. Malcolm is quite right. The reality is that in different parts of the Albert Hall, you hear different things, but the judges are all sitting in the same place, so there's no, there's no arguing about that.
And as I say, with regards to the three judges, no arguing with regards to the experience, no arguing about the approach that they actually take. And I have to say, they were worked hard over the weekend. All three of them had some part to play in a concert the previous night at the Royal Academy, the Royal College of Music, just over the road, where Mr. Bowsfield was on absolutely stunning form with his playing. Stephen Cobb was conducting the International Staff Band, and Rob Whiffin was there listening. So he was listening to a lot of music over that week. So it was actually great to see them. So that was, in general impressions, you can see then why the piece was such a great test of bands who wish to be crowned champion band of Great Britain, and also a great test not only of the players, although it was no great virtuosic passages in there, which sometimes we brass band audiences love. It was a very different test in that respect, but especially for the conductors, they needed a real deep musical understanding to make things work. And as I say, some of them went on one route and others went on another route. The consistency came with the judges when they then, with the approach and the interpretations that they liked and had resonance in the box. So with regards to that then, let's have a look at why possibly the contest was won and lost. And we have to start, of course, with the Desford Band. But before we do that, there is a lovely thing. The winning conductor, David Morton, has got in contact with us, and he has said, we will be listening on the journey home from band tonight. Now, I don't know whether or not that's in Desford or that's the...
I think that's back in Norway, I suspect.
I would have thought it's back in Norway. Good on him for doing that. Be nice, he says. We're always nice, Dave, come on. We were nice to him outside. I think we offered him a hotel bed for the night. We did there. Also, for some of his players.
He'd have been sleeping on the street along with most of the rest of the band.
Just to tell the audience, a number of the players were on their way back to Euston Station to catch the last train home. So a lot of them went back to the pub to celebrate fantastic celebrations they had in the night. But I think they weren't worried too much where they were going to be sleeping. So, so a lot of them for that there. So he says, be nice and praise the fantastic musicians at Desford Colliery Band. They were a pleasure to work with and were extremely responsive. And back in return from that, the very next comment, although they were written separately apart, comes from Jonathan Pippin. Good old Pips, who played tremendous solo trombone player with the band on the day and marked in some of the adjudications for his contribution that he made. He says, I really enjoyed playing for Desford at the contest. I came off stage feeling like we played well. I think the respect shown by our musical director to the wishes of the composer shone through. Well, that was certainly the case with the three gentlemen in the box. So what was it? Even though, and let's put our cards on the table, I think Stephen Mead had them as a dark horse. I think you had them about 8th, 7th, 8th, 9th, something around there.
8th,
Josie was with us at exactly the same. And a lot of people who we spoke to had them round about, possibly the top around about 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 around there. But what was it then that caught the ear of the judges, do you think, with their approach?
I think first of all, we've got to give some context to it, because I think they drew number 15. They played, and this is to take nothing away from Desford, but they played just after Brighouse. And Brighouse's performance had started brilliantly but waned a little bit towards the end. And I think one of the key factors that we heard in Desford's performance was consistency. It was consistent from start to finish. It wasn't faultless, and I think it was Rob Whiffin that commented in his remarks that, that there were a few lumps and bumps along the way. There were a few slips, but conceptually, it was an excellent performance. I think the tempi were bang on, and I think that's one important factor that when you look at the bands in the top 6 is pretty common between them, and I think David Morton had clearly put a lot of thought and a lot of preparation to that, into getting the tempi right. the subtle variations, the subtle nuances of tempo changes, because they were the things that were really knitting the piece together. And I think another thing that I think Ian Bousfield had commented on was that they were looking for a vision of the piece. They were looking for a holistic performance, and I think actually that's what Desford gave. So, in essence, it was consistent. It was technically accurate. It wasn't without slips. It was musically what the judges were looking for as a performance. And one other point that I would throw in is that Desford play naturally, I think, with quite a lean orchestral or symphonic sound, a lot more than some of the other British bands do. In fact, in some ways, maybe their sound is more akin to some of the Norwegian bands than it is to a lot of the British bands. And I actually just think that suited the music. Eddie, obviously there's a version of this for symphonic brass. And I know that Eddie's very, very fond of that version of the piece. But there was something about Desford's performance from a sound point of view that I think played into the music in terms of the textures. And you were saying that it's a piece that's actually quite dense from a counterpoint point of view in places, isn't it? But the textures are absolutely critical, because when it is dense, there's a lot going on, and I think a lot of that detail was very clear and audible in Desford's performance, and the sound of the band was a significant factor in that. So there's a number of points there that I think contributed.
The other point I think is worth mentioning as well. First of all, congratulations to David Morton. He is a real talent. We've seen him over the last few years emerge. A very, very fine cornet player, a principal cornet player, of course, with Ikanger Band. He's taken up onto the baton, and he's really, a bit like the performances, he's refined his conducting. He's quite constrained and compact with his conducting. He knows exactly what he wants. I know he is exceptionally well prepared. The number of people I've spoken to who have worked under him have always said they're very, very clear with his musical thought processes. But he really did bring that, I think, to the performance. The other thing, I think, is that given the way in which the judges, what they were actually looking for, the performance before them came from Brighouse and Rastrick Band. Much more adjectival performance. It did have the excitement and the ecstasy, and it had all that part of it in it. It was heading, and you have to say, I spoke to Ian Bousfield after, they say the judges felt, blimey, this could be the one. This could be the real high bar marker. And as I said, it just fell away. It had a couple of blips and blobs to start off with, and it just fell away towards the end. Then all of a sudden, this performance came. And as you said, it had the absolute blueprint they were looking for. And the way in which it was actually delivered by the band. Now, it may have been missed by a lot of people in the hall, ourselves included, or whatever. But for the people in the box, it actually gave them exactly what they were looking for. And set against a fine performance, if flawed, by Brighouse and Rastrick, I think that elevated it there. And they appreciated what they were being given by Desford with that performance. And I think that really but the way in which those experienced players performed on stage, but especially the conductor, he has got I don't know how old he is, David, but he's got a wise old head on youngish shoulders.
He strikes me. I think that there is the manner of a very thoughtful conductor, isn't there? I mean, he's quite a. I mean, I don't know David well, but he strikes me as quite a quiet, thoughtful sort of guy who, and it was obvious from the performance that there was a lot of thought, a lot of preparation, and he'd applied some time and intellect to the interpretation and the performance, and that's one of the things I think that came through.
Well, we got a comment as well from Tom Challoner, and he has said, huge congratulations to David Morton and Desford. A pleasure to hear it live in the hall. Rob Whiffin's comments summed it up perfectly. He said it wasn't faultless, and that's part of it, but the vision, and that's the key. I think it was Whiffin who actually said about the vision in his end, and reading work compelling. And you're right. And go back to the judges, it was interesting. I managed to see the adjudications of the top six and brought out the top three to put onto 4Barsrest. There was unanimity in the box, I was told afterwards. There was certainly unanimity when it came to the results. But in the discussion processes, there must have been some good arguments in that box, because if you have a look at the comments, you've got Bousfield, who had, was sitting back and listening by the looks of it. He didn't write a great deal. The other two were much more traditional in their approach. But there were differences of opinion.
Yeah.
And especially, as you said, but I think balancing that out against each other, which must be good when it works like that in the box. Then they got that unanimity when it came to the final decision. But it was interesting, as Tom said, Rob Whiffin must have thought, I like that performance today. He would have put forward a strong case. And the other two as well, looking back at their notes, etc., and then coming up with the result it is. A little bit later on, after the announcement of the result, they confirmed, he said first place was clear. There was a defined first place between first and second, and then very close with third place, and then fourth, and then the bands below them.
Yeah.
So they had a very, very clear blueprint that they wanted to hear, and that was actually given to them. And interesting as well, Mike Smith. Good old Mike, I spoke to him. Congratulations indeed to you. The timings of 18 minutes worked well, for better or worse, for the lack of and moving of ridiculous levels of percussion equipment. Don't say that about percussionists. They don't move about that. Mike, God blimey. You've got to find out where you're going to get your percussionists next. And soloist stands dotted around the stage. In its way, it was a test piece that harked back to the traditional strengths of brass banding.
Yeah,
it was a coherent whole. Sometimes we do the little bits of walking around, and we do the percussion exotica quite over the top a little bit. So it was restrained in that way. That was certainly shown by Desford, and that's the reason why they ticked all the boxes for those three experienced adjudicators in the box.
Genuinely good music doesn't need those kind of histrionics, Ewan. That's the bottom line. And again, we keep coming back to it. What we had was a fabulous piece of music. And I think that's, again, the reason why there's been so much debate. We sat talking about the adjudicators and differences of opinion. I think we got to a point in this contest in the afternoon, and I say this in the most positive way. I was sitting with Stephen Mead and one or two other people, and we just sat and looked at each other. Tim Newton was with us as well. Mm-hmm. And I think we looked at each other at one point and said, I wouldn't want to be in the box today. I really would not want to be in the box.
No, I've spoken to a couple of people, the usual people we'd always talk, we'd always speaking to people throughout the day, after the day, into the night in the pub, I have to say. And then
indeed,
the following day, whatever. I was going to say the following day, I was stuck in a train for 2 hours. Train broke down on the way home back to Wales. And speaking to people, and a lot of it did come down to that. Nobody bolted the door. I think that was a part of it there.
Quite right.
But what it did do, and it actually showed when you delve, scrape below the surface, the initial surprise, etc. When you look beneath the surface, find out what the judges thought, find out about the approach, and especially with the conductors who conducted the bands that came in the prizes. There was a level of consistency about that. So, as we say, a surprise, but nothing really of a shock.
Agreed.
I'm going to say, John Sturzak makes a good little point here. I know John is of a certain age. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. Well done, John. Great to have you with us. Great photographer, John, as well. You should see it there. Decades ago, the box was built up to a level with the stage.
Yes.
And before that, I think the box was actually up on the first tier by the side of the stage behind the soprano cornet.
Yeah.
And then it was brought to the front. It was I think it was actually built out of cast iron or whatever. My word, it was there. And had little slats in the front of it. So, but it's gradually got further and further back into the hall. So, but as I say, it's about the best place to actually listen to those performances. Malcolm Gate, he's come back to things, and he is echoing the point that you make there. I think the judges look for a more restrained, faithful to the score approach rather than the one that brought the more vivid page off the score approach, which proved too avant-garde for the judges. I don't know whether or not avant-garde for Ian Bousfield. He's played some avant-garde music, I would have thought, over the years. But I take your point, Malcolm, with regards to that. I think and if you look at the results, and we'll talk about some of the other performances as well, they knew what they wanted. And that was given to them by Desford and David Morton.
Yeah, and they were consistent in their decision making in that respect, weren't they? So
there was the winner. Now the band that put them closest, of course, was a band that just a few weeks previously was drawn number one, had a bit of a disastrous day, and people were thinking the end of Nicholas Charles and the Black Dyke Band as a force. But no, they came and delivered in space. I have to say, it was a super performance. And again, just a couple of seconds either side in terms of duration to the Desford performance.
Yeah.
Cut very much from the same musical cloth.
Yes.
It was really interesting to hear that. There was a refinement, there was an elegance about it, beautiful sound from the band as well. They really did make it sound. Professor Cha, he knows Edward Gregson's music. He grew up on it, and he's commissioned works. He's played it. He's won on a piece. I think they won on music from music in an olden style. He knows his piece. Yeah. So
he knows this. He knows this piece very well, Ewan. I mean, I think we said last time we remember him conducting it as their own choice at the Europeans in Oslo. What was that? 12 years ago now, I think, something like that. So he knows the piece. He loves the piece. And that came across, didn't it? I mean, they had a relatively early draw, number 7. Phones had already played at number 4. But Dykes was a classy performance, wasn't it? I mean, as you said, really, really finding the symphonic nature of the music. Fabulous soloists. I mean, the soloists were on top form. The ensemble, everything was neat and precise. They had a point to prove, and it sounded like they meant to prove it, and they certainly succeeded in doing that. I don't actually think a lot of people would have been surprised if Black Dyke had been first, but second was a fair placing.
It's interesting, they got so many fans, Black Dyke, all over the place. They are the global brand of brass band in many ways. But it was interesting when you speak to people who've got like a stubborn appreciation of what they do, but they don't like to actually say, well, even they would turn around and say, Dyke is the band, possibly the band to beat. They played fairly early. I think they played number 7. Number 7 they played, didn't they? So they really did set that mark. And as you say, in terms of what they played and how they played it, that was then, I wouldn't say copied, but it reflected very much in Desford's performance a little bit.
It was again very authentic to the score, and I think, and again, this ties in with what we've been talking about, what the judges were looking for. It was a performance that was authentic to the score in terms of its markings, and it was a performance that was authentic to the score in terms of its spirit and its structure and its style.
Yeah, and congratulations for that there. Mike Smith came back and he said, I think Dave said he's 42. He must have had an easy paper round. He's done well for himself at 42 if he's doing that. 42, I wish I was 42
don't we just
back
you
again.
And don't we just
well, I know
wish.
Brigitte, his wife, and he's got a young family. He's having a fantastic time, and congratulations out there in Norway. And if he's listening now, the kid should be in bed. He should be having a glass of wine and enjoying and carry on celebrating until Sidis in a couple of weeks' time.
Absolutely.
When we go back to it. Well, further on from that, in third place was the defending champions, the Flowers Band. And I have to say, they are now such an imposing band and such an impressive, confident band. That when they came on stage, they must have thought, what a great draw for us. I think they were drawn 18, out of the 19.
Yes,
and just to come on stage and play after a long day the way they did. And again, very much tied in with those two performances that came before them from Black Dyke and Flowers. There was a dark richness to the sound, excellent soloists, very, very compact. There was something about it that you knew that was going to be in the mix come the results.
Yeah, there was, and I think a lot of people actually thought that Flowers might be in with a shout of, well, if not successfully defending the title, certainly sort of edging into the top 2. I mean, they are a fantastic group of players. I mean, there are some wonderful players around the stands in Flowers. And again, on Saturday, the soloist was superb. Luke Barker on principal, Paul Richards on soprano. Some terrific performances from those guys. Again, it was a consistent performance. It was technically extremely accurate. If there was something, I mean, we're scratching around here, Ewan, quite honestly, but if there was something that separated it from Black Dyke, it might just have been a little bit of magic in one or two places, maybe in the slow variation in the second movement. But, we're talking about very, very fine margins here. And certainly it had the consistency and it had the accuracy and the stamina, because that's something else that this piece calls for that we've not really talked about so far.
No, I think the judges actually said that at the draw, and somebody was telling me what do they say at the draw, and it's usually generalizations there. It's too late if they turn around and say we want a piece played in this way. You've had it. But stamina was one thing as well. And the very top bands can play and make sure that they can play it all the way there. The other part, interestingly, when you looked at the adjudications themselves, and we talked about sometimes. It's one of the great myths. One of my pet hates is when an adjudicator comes out and says, me and my colleague agreed on every band from number 1 to number 21, and you just think that's absolute nonsense, If you have a look at the adjudications, I think for Flowers, Rob Whiffin, it didn't really appeal to Rob Whiffin. It certainly appealed to the other two judges. So it would have been interesting how they would have balanced that in the box as well. But it's good because for me personally, I like it when I hear that there are 3 different sets of opinions in the box. Almost quite defined in their difference in a way, because then they have to argue their case. They have to weigh up the pros and cons of those performances to come to that consensus, that unanimity in the box. So that would have been an interesting one. But again, as you say with Flowers, such an impressive band.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Ian Bousfield did say from the stage at the end that they agreed on all the placings from 1 to 19. But it's not as simple as that, is it? I mean, it would be bizarre if the judges were simply to agree on those without debate. Of course there's going to be debate, and of course there are going to be differences of opinion, but you reach a verdict based on those different opinions and a degree of discussion. So there would have been debate in the box, and it's healthy that we get that, isn't it?
Yeah, there was debate around the hall, I think, as well.
Absolutely. After, there's debate all round.
And I think that makes it a much better atmosphere, doesn't it? One of the one of the odd things about competitions that everybody says, we tried to pick the winner. But sometimes it's great when you really got to dig deep and to think about who's going to come out on top with regards to that. Right, they were the top 3 prize winners. Congratulations, I have to say, go to the Whitburn band, who picked up 4th place. And of course, because of the rule changes, they now pre-qualify for the contest next year. And it is congratulations. You got young Chris Shanks there, who was making his debut with the band. And what fantastic achievement. What a debut from that gentleman. Congratulations indeed. Now, Whitburn, they know what the cruelty of banding is like, because at the British Open they came 10th. And to come 10th at the British Open is some achievement, I have to say. Possibly the most, highest standard brass band competition in the world. You can talk about over a big major test piece. They came 10th and were relegated to the Grand Shield, so they'll be going to the European Championships and Birmingham within a week of each other next year. So they went from that to 4th place at the national finals, and again, early draw. I think they were drawn number 3. I think it was.
Yeah, they were.
They put in that type of performance that the judges were looking for. Started so well indeed. Got a little bit tired just towards the end, maybe, but they were such good play, and players like Chris Bradley, the soprano player. There are so many good players in that band. And I always see the Frasers, who are the great supporters, and he put his eyes to the top of his Robert. They put his eyes to the top of his forehead when he said, drawn number 3. But the delight that they had afterwards, they thoroughly deserved it. It's great to see Whitburn back in it, because they've been battling against things in recently, haven't had a lot of luck, but this was something for them. And I know they certainly had a great night on Saturday night in the pub.
Yeah, and to endure from band number 3 amongst a field of 19 bands of that standard, I mean, that in itself is a pretty remarkable feat. But as you say, huge experience around the stands. I mean, some real stalwarts. Chris Bradley, as you say, being one of them, who've been there for many years. But the first movement for Whitburn was absolutely fabulous. The toccata was superb. I think it was only probably halfway through the variations where it became clear that they were starting to tire a little bit, which is understandable for the reasons that we've already talked about. But for the first 2/3 of Whitburn's performance, I remember sitting and thinking partway through, wow, this is really, really terrific stuff. So, just a great concept of the piece. As you say, some terrific playing from some very, very experienced players, but just fell away a little bit towards the end.
One thing you talk about there, 2/3 of the way through, one band that certainly had 2/3 of the way through was Brighouse and Rastrick Band in 5th place, and Professor David King, there he is there. it was a performance that many people, I think including even the judges, felt maybe heading towards claiming a historic double for them.
Yeah.
It wasn't to be. They had a few little blips and blobs early on in the piece, and then it just lost its cohesion a little bit later on as well. Very fine performance yet again from the band. So for fifth place, possibly you could say they were a little bit unlucky in coming fifth. But again, theirs was talking about different approach. That the adjective different would have been used to do it. And I think that's the way to describe it. He really went for something a little bit different in his approach to David King, and it very nearly paid off.
It did, and David always does, as we know. But I have to say, the first half to 2/3 of Brighouse's performance, some of the playing was absolutely stunning. I mean, really, truly stunning. And then a few little things just started to fall away, a couple of little slips, and that just seemed to start a succession of little mistakes as they got towards the end. So again, it was one of those performances, and there were several performances like this where we've just been talking about Whitburn, not dissimilar. Started extremely well, terrific toccata. Even the variations started very well. But again, not just stamina on the lips, but actually mental stamina to some degree, I think, that starts to slip. I mean, it's a piece that demands a lot of concentration and focus. And it wasn't just the lips that slipped with some of the band. It was those intense levels of focus and concentration that the piece calls for.
One band that really did intense focus and concentration, I think, and played really at the top of their form was Hepworth Band that completed the top six.
Yeah.
Here's Ryan Watkins. He's very suave. He looks like Watkins. Brian Watkins. A bit like James Bond there, isn't he, on that part of it? A man who could wear a good dicky bow by the looks of him. Good man.
Always well turned out, Ryan, isn't he?
Talented lad. Whoa, a real talented lad. And a fine performance by the band. They really did. I have to say, that didn't come in as a surprise to anybody, because throughout the day, that name kept cropping up from a lot of people in the top six for Hepworth.
It was one of those performances that was quite visceral. It was quite upfront in some ways, but it was hugely committed, hugely energetic. Again, good soloist, very tight ensemble. I have to say that Ryan clearly has that band on the end of his baton, because they were a very, very tight and rigid group of players. And yeah, you're absolutely right. There was a lot of talk about Hepworth around the hall. I mean, I think I spoke to many people that predicted that they would be creeping into the bottom end of the top six, or certainly around sort of 6th, 7th place, and that's exactly what turned out to be the case. But a thoroughly deserved result for Hepworth.
Yeah, I think Ian Porter's had to buy his son Harry a pint, I think, later on in the night. Harry,
or two.
Yeah, Harry, two. More. Harry's drinking quite a bit nowadays. God bless him.
I have to say, he was enjoying himself in the Gloucester Arms later on.
Yeah, he was indeed great lad. So they came 6th. Rodrigo was 7th. Others of note, I think, which we can name, it was Delight for Ebbw Valley. As I said, Tredegar were 7th place. People had them slightly high, whatever. But Ebbw Valley, the second band from Blaenau Gwent, and if people know South Wales at all, Tredegar's in the one valley, Ebbw Valley is the next one over. Congratulations to them. 8th place is a wonderful achievement from them.
Yeah.
The one band a bit further down, though, that did raise eyebrows, Foden's in 11th place. Now, you talked about the approach. There's Russell Gray. Russell Gray does usually much broader canvases in which he draws his musical inspiration and creates the musical pictures that he does. On this occasion, I think it was one of those ones that the approach and the playing of the band just didn't resonate in the box. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't, and this may be one of those ones.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed Foden's performance from the perspective that, as always, Russell has a fantastic vision, concept, shape for a piece, and you get that kind of architecture in Russell's performances, particularly with a piece like this, because it plays into his hands on a musical level. Russell's a conductor that's used to working with orchestras, and this is the sort of piece that is food and drink to him. So we had that from them. I think there were probably, when you listen quite closely, there were some little clips and little inconsistencies, maybe one or two tiny little tuning issues here and there. But there was something in the box that just didn't quite resonate with Foden's on the day. I mean, 11th, I think, was a surprise for a lot of people, to be honest, including myself. I thought they would have finished a lot higher than that. But as you said, it just didn't resonate with the judges, and I think they were quite clear and open about that afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, but again, everybody's been in we've been in contesting plenty of times. I can remember.
Yeah.
I'll have to say, I remember a performance once. I wasn't playing for Tredegar. I was playing for, I think it was Sovereign at Pontins the one year on Diadem Gold.
Yeah.
And I had a brilliant day. I'm not just boasting. I had a brilliant day, right? I was like a young Alan Wycherley. I was playing, right? Played everything. Everybody came up to us afterwards. Oh, fantastic, Iwan! You were brilliant. You know, the band were really good. All went in to try and find the results at the end of it. I think we came 16th. And it said on the I always remember it said in the adjudication, self-indulgent soprano. So we've all
I was playing that day, Ewan. We were playing against each other that day.
I bet you never had self-indulgent bass trombone written against you, but I remember that.
Lots of times, Ewan, I can tell you. But
so we've all been there, so we feel the pain of the Foden's band and Russell Gray with that one, but they're a great band, and I'm sure they will
not their day, but...
And one final band, I think, we can't cover everybody band. I have to really give a mention to East London Brass.
Yep.
They were making their debuts at the competition. There's Jane Morell. Jane, of course, whose partner Lloyd Shipp played for Desford. So there we are. So I have to say, on their debut, to be drawn number one and then go onto the stage, they perform excellently. And not only that, and I think this is a part that's been brought up. Martin Brabbins, the conductor, he was following the action in Adelaide, he told us, where he was conducting out there and following. He said that possibly the best story of all of this championships was that there were two female conductors, I think, conducting for the first time at the national championship. And Jane and Katrina Marcella are there. There's nothing tokenism about this. This is sheer talent.
It is,
and what both of those people have done, and especially Jane at East London Brass, to bring them all the way through now to the national finals. And I'm quite sure they will be back again. Hopefully not on number one. They'll have a better draw the next time. They won't get it twice in a row, I hope, for that. But they excellent for that part of it there. And as I say, that was one of the real positives of it. One comment that is coming through. John Sturzacker has said, is this the time for separate judging? Well, we've had separate judging before, I think, in the English Masters, and that would open, I think, a can of worms if we did that one. I think consensus is a good thing, especially when you've got three experienced adjudicators. They can argue their case, and if they win the argument, if they lose the argument, but you come to that consensus, and that is what... Speaking to Ian Bowsford, he says there is unanimity about their final decisions. They may not have agreed individually about each performance,
but they had the consensus.
And when they came together. And Mark Rennox has come back and says, Chris, Dyke was classy, had point to prove, but beaten by a better band on the day. Don't praise Dyke, give more praise for Desford. Well, I think we've given praise to both of the bands.
Let me just say something about Desford, Ewan, in this respect, because I've seen quite a bit on social media over the last few days about Desford, and I've seen it before. It deeply, deeply frustrates me when people talk about Desford as a scratch band or a band of part-time players. Desford have a particular rehearsal model, and it works for them. I left Desford in 1993, so what's that, 32 years ago since I left Desford. And there were players in that band who played on that stage on Saturday that were in the band when I was. Stuart Dean on euphonium, Sarah Latham, you can see her there on third cornet, Pete Smith, the band manager, Dave Smith, his son, who's sitting there next to Kevin Crockford
Darren
Pearce. They are players that were in that band when I was there 32 years ago. That is something. There is a nucleus in that band and a heart that makes Desford what it is, and it's completely wrong to describe them as a scratch band simply because they have a different rehearsal model to other bands. It works for them, obviously it does. They're national champions, So I think people have to just accept the fact that they work differently to other bands. But this is modern banding. I mean, you can't stay the same. It's a model that works for them. It's tried and tested. And any doubters, well, here we are, national champions 2025.
Well, that's the point. You've segued very nicely into part 2 of our conversation for this evening, as you say. Yeah, the Desford model. Now, it is a model, as you say, which we have talked about over the years. It's full of great players. One of them is there, Mr. Crockford. I think he's been a member of that band for 8 years now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say how old is Kevin, but I think he's enjoying himself. I don't think he's getting up at 7:30 in the morning to go to work on a Monday morning, but he must be getting up to do practicing on a soprano. He's absolutely brilliant. And again, those are the players who are now enjoying their band in a different way. They've got lives to lead. They've gone over I'm going to say, the youthful enthusiasm of wanting to go out every night to go to band. But it is a model, and you say people like Pete Smith, who's been the band manager for many, many years and keeps that band on the road. And when I say on the road, that's on the road from Colville to Singapore, because they are regular visitors going across the world. And the players that they've got involved there, people like Gary Wyatt on Principal Cornet, etc., Jim Fielder, all dotted around, Stuart Dean on euphonium, dotted around that band are players. That type of banding suits them. That type of banding means that they can give 100% when it's required of them.
And why should that be not to you? And that's the bottom line. It suits them, and it works for them, and that's all that matters. I find it incredible. I can't actually quite believe that Pete Smith was the band manager when I was there all those years ago, and is still there 32 years on. I mean, it's incredible, and they deserve huge credit for that. I mean, the
heck
band
of a character, Pete Smith, isn't he?
Absolutely. He is that all right.
But David's son, I think he's been playing for donkey's years out in Singapore, I think.
He plays the symphony orchestra in Singapore. That's right.
So all the players are involved in the band. They're invested in the band. They're very proud of the band and what they do in that respect. And as you say, as a model, it works for them. If it's a model that banding wants, to copy, everybody wants to copy, it won't work. Because other bands want to go and be much more based within their community foundations, building possibly one band on top of a structure, etc. Other bands will want to get their players in, want to do much more concerts, etc., like the likes of Foden's or Corey or Black Dyke or Briggers, do a lot more concerts. They've got the balance that suits their players well. They've got the retention rate, I think, is as better in Desford than just about any other band in the country.
And
that's the amazing thing with regards to that there. And then when they bring that in, they've got a conductor who appreciates the way in which they work, is able then to say, right, we've got 2 weekends or 2 weeks of intense rehearsal. Everybody's giving 100%. Then it actually pays off. They've had some great results, as we say, this time. They've had unlucky results. They've had some poor results. But I think it is a model that works from there. Now, I was going to say with regards to that also, because around the world, there are other bands that have actually copied it, some successfully, some other ones. If we go, for instance, in the UK, you could say in a way, the Oldham Lees band. I think something came up on social media, which was actually dated prior to the national championship win and related to Oldham Lees band. But they've got a model that actually works. They've got a core nucleus of players and other players which are committed to the band, but not on a week-to-week basis. And that's worked for them. That's got them through to the British Open and got through to the national final. So they've done well. There was a band down in the west of England, Filton Concert, for many years who did it. Project-led, but now, they've got a balance that they want to do. Zone 1 Brass. That must be a band that got together, I wouldn't say the least amount of rehearsals. It would have been fascinating to see the way in which they worked under Richard Ward, fine conductor, Richard.
He's a fine musician.
They more than hold their own when it comes to these competitions. And then if we go further afield, we've got bands called Sydney City Brass. In Australia. There they are. They are the Australian National Championships champions. They will be coming to the British Open next year. Now, they don't practice every week. But they get
Dean Morley in the middle, another Desford player there.
There we are. And they're in purple as well. So you can blame me. There we are.
Absolutely.
So it could be. So there we are.
Purple Rain.
So all of those people, Swiss band in, there's a Wahlberg band, Norwegian band in, there are different bands that do it, Dutch band in is in, they're all different models. And I think it's the strength of banding in many ways that we can embrace all of those. It doesn't have to be one model that proves successful. And as is shown by Desford winning, if that suits that band, good on them for actually doing
well, you
it.
can say, as we know, we can say similar things about the Swiss bands, Ewan, can't we? Valesia, Tres Etoiles, bands that, that they don't function in the same way that bands traditionally do in the UK. And does that really matter? At the end of the day, what works for different bands works for different bands. What we should be focusing on is the musical quality that they produce. And in the case of a lot of these bands that we've just talked about, the quality of the music is beyond question.
It is. Nice to see some comments coming in. Kevin Stewart says, so well said, Chris. This is Kevin's second stint with the band. So Kevin Crockford has been around such a long time. I think people forget. Yeah. And he's won every prize under the sun. And he won the...
He's got another one now.
It was the best. I think it's the best. I think it's called something else, but it's the best instrumentalist prize. To do that, he was winning prizes back in the 80s, and now he's winning prizes. I think he's like the Mark Williams, the snooker player of brass band soprano player. He's going to win everything up until his 90th decade, I'm sure, Kevin, with that one. And it's lovely. Daz Pierce, I think that's Della Pierce. I'm the Desford model.
Well, it depends what sort of model he's talking about, knowing Daz. So,
Daz is a he, is it? All right, okay. Sorry, I thought it was somebody else.
This is the Darren Pierce that we know from Desford.
That's Darren.
That's Darren. Yeah.
Well, he looks like a model out of one of those. What was it? Cardigan adverts that they used to have in the 1970s in the in those bike He goes, and then Patrick Pirana, I don't know who that is. I've got a Daz Pierce photo on my bedroom ceiling.
That's deeply troubling, actually.
That is, along with Pete Smith.
Deeply
troubling. I'd be very troubled. Yeah, I got a funny feeling. Don't come near the kids, and I want my lawnmower back. That's coming there. I got to be.
I noticed John Pippin has just said the truth is, if Desford didn't have the formula that they do, the vast majority of our members wouldn't be able to take part in banding at all. I mean, that is a vital point, Ewan, isn't it? A vital point. And, there were some veterans around the stands in Desford, but there were veterans in other bands as well. It reminds me of the old football analogy. You remember Swansea City when Bob Latchford managed them and started pulling in old Liverpool players?
John Toshak.
Well, John Toshak.
John Toshak managed them. And he got
pulled
in
a load of old players. Bob Latchford was playing. You're right, and he built a team of veterans at Swansea, which did incredibly well for a couple of seasons.
Yeah, they had Tommy Smith down there. Ian Callaghan. Ooh,
exactly. Ray Kennedy. There were quite a few. But the reality is, and I think John's point is really important here, is that these are players that we wouldn't have the pleasure of hearing if it wasn't for Desford's model, and Kevin Crockford is probably one of those, quite honestly.
Well, I know we're talking about age. We're going to say about the future now. Then hopefully all those players at Desford are going to be around for many, many more years to come. There's the Albert Hall itself. Now, we did speak in our previous podcast about where this competition would go, and just before we went it, I did the preview of the event. There's been some decisions which may externally have pressures on the event. There's a High Court decision which will be going through, I think, in the next couple of months, with regards to the sale of and hiring out of members' seats and tickets for non-exclusive events. Now, it's at an early stage, but it will be going through to the High Court, and that may have an effect on whether or not non-exclusive events can still take on into the Albert Hall. So that's one to keep an interest on. The other one is that they've just announced that they've appointed like a new chief executive looking to raise something in the region of 50 million quid to keep the place going. Now, these are things to bear in mind because, the Albert Hall, even I think there was about I don't know what the numbers were for this year. They was certainly up from last year.
They were definitely up, Ewan. And I
there
think
was a positive thing with regards
Phil
to that.
Morris sort of gave a very positive message from the stage at the end. In fact, he actually asked the audience a question, didn't he? Actually said, "Do you want to be here back next year?" And there was there was a shout of yes that sort of went around the hall. So, but obviously those external factors, Capital have only got limited control over, haven't they, if any?
It was, but so there are things to bear in mind with regards to that. And I'm going to say the good things from the Albert Hall this year. Numbers are up. 2 women conductors, as we said. It was wonderful to see. Lots of European visitors, as always. I think in the box next to us with the Swiss, a little bit further down, the Dutch were there. As always, the
Norwegian, quite a big contingent from Norway.
Morten Hansen and the gang were all there, and the Icon. It's great to see them there. And the other thing I have to say also, it was very well organised.
It was. Very, very slick. I mean, even moving the bands. I mean, it was critical that they got bands on and off pretty quickly on Saturday, given the time span, and they did that, I think, very successfully, to the point where it was actually quite difficult to get our live comments written up in between performances at times. So it was very slick.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of good from that. There was some television coverage, although I think some of it was to do with the sumo wrestlers who were coming later on in the week. But there was some television. I think ITV were following East London Brass and Zone 1 for some regional news. So I think that may be going on there. And I have to say as well, the PR company, which is now involved with Capital Promotions, made sure that social media presence, they've now got social media presence. So all of a sudden, the buds are there with the possibility now of expanding. It's got ground to make up, because even if you get, as you say, maybe 1,500 people there this year, 1,600 people. If you get 2,500 people there, which would be the biggest, the biggest crowd in banding in the UK. The Albert Hall is only half full. So it's still got a ground to make up, but there was a lot of good things there.
There was progress, Ewan. There was progress.
And congratulations to Capital, Tim Jones, who was leading it alongside Phil Morris, etc. Tim's team were brilliant backstage and what they were doing. So congratulations to those. And I say, maybe not so good. We covered this. There's still possibly too many bands at the event. Illegal videos. Again, the Albert Hall hates this, and they've gotten in contact with such as 4Barsrest plenty of times before. They will come after you. If you start posting illegal videos on there of performances, put it up next to your band's name. Don't be surprised that you'll have a letter coming through, or a reminder, a cease and desist letter, followed by Carter, Ruck and Thompson or whatever it is, saying, you're going to owe us now a couple of £1,000. Please don't do it. It's, it's idiotic and amateurish to start off with. So to do that one.
Absolutely.
One thing I would say a positive, but it was a strange one. The mini concert given by Youth Brass 2000. Wonderful to see them there, and I think it was a wonderful experience for all those great players. But it comes at the end of a long day. People are tired, they want to go home, or they want to go out and get a meal in London or go to the pub, etc. So it was fantastic. Congratulations to Chris Jeans and his young players for doing that. It was wonderful entertainment, but it did come at the end of a long day.
It did, and you've got to feel sorry for the players to some degree, because they gave it their all. They're a terrific organisation, absolutely amazing organisation, and it's no fault of the audience. I mean, a lot of them have just sat through a day of contesting that started at 10 o'clock and finished at 7 o'clock, I think, Ewan, by the time pretty much by the time the last band had gone off. People need a break, and that's not the fault of Youth Brass 2000. They did a great show, as you say, but they deserve a bigger audience, to be fair.
Yeah, and it was because, as I say, if we're going to try and inspire the next generation or the generation along that part of it, coming at the end, waiting for a long time at the end of the day when people genuinely are tired and not paying great amount of attention to what's actually going on on the stage is hard one. But all those things aside, Simone was excellent once again as the compere and the master of ceremonies, all that sort of stuff. They were real positives to that event, but there is still a lot to do. Next year, it will be on the 3rd of October, the day after Brastoff Live with Grimethorpe Colliery Band. Now that could if it pans out in, as it did in 1992, that could be one heck of a social media story or news story if Grimethorpe are back there for that one. So it's on the 3rd of next year. And to say next year, because of the change in the rules, there'll be 3 bands from the Midlands from the first time since 1991, 3 bands from Yorkshire, 3 from the west of England, second time in a row, and 3 bands from Scotland.
Some opportunities there, Ewan, eh?
It is. I was going to say, nice to see Julian Bright, who has come back on with us as we come to the closing moments. So many great and thought-provoking comments tonight, gents. A real positive and realistic appraisal of the Desford effect. Yeah, it is an effect. Well done and thanks, and good on. I hope for many, many more years that will continue. So finally, Chris, what's next for us as we come to the end of this one? I know there are national championships going across
There are
Europe,
indeed.
and you are heading to Utrecht
Indeed,
for the Netherlands National Championship. There it is. That's the wonderful,
fabulous hall,
Tivoli Gardens, isn't it? That's the that's
there.
there. It's a lovely place to go. Very easy to go to. If anybody wants to go to another national championships, all you have to do is pop on a plane, get to Amsterdam. You just jump on the train, and it literally stops outside that hall.
Lovely city,
lovely city, lovely people, really well organised event if you want to go somewhere. And if you enjoy Edward Gregson's music, there's a week. Every section of that competition is featured in Edward Gregson's music.
It's an Eddie fest, Ewan, as we've said before.
Eddie will be out there again. He will be.
He will.
I like to see his royalties at the end of this year. He'll have a nice fat check. He is going back from there.
He might retire eventually after all these years. Ewan.
Yeah, you have to see. But there we go.
I doubt
I myself will be going to Lucerne for the Swiss National Championships. I'm a lucky boy. There's, I think that's Valencia, isn't it?
It is
Valencia, I have to remember who was one there. It looks like they won the European Cup, but it is the Valencia band. Great hall again to go to play in there, and a wonderful atmosphere. Talking about an event that is very well run, that is a very, very well run, slick event there. And also, apart from those championships, there's championships going on in Belgium. And as I say, apart from that, there we go. There are then the 2 entertainment national championships, as we call them. The first one there in Stavanger. I'll be heading back there in a couple of weeks' time with the Wobplay team, who are the sponsors of tonight's broadcast. They will be going to find out what the entertainment is like at the Cities Championships. And finally, we got Brass in Concert also on Wobplay. And I think you've got to be very quick for Brass in Concerts. I think there are less than 30 tickets left for you to get that there. So we will be back. Chris, it's been great to have you. Thanks, John Sturzaker. Thank you, gentlemen. Worth delaying the Archers for. What's happening in the Archers, John? My word, what's been happening there? Is Ed Grundy still going in the Archers, if you remember him there, that part of it there. We'll be back, therefore, for another review programme with CD reviews, etc., and more that we can go through. Chris, it's been great to have you with us again. We had a wonderful event.
Thanks, Ewan.
And we had a great time at the National Championships.
We did indeed.
Once more, our congratulations go to Desford Colliery Band, David Morton and their team for being crowned 2025 National Champions of Great Britain. Remember to subscribe to our channel. You can go back onto YouTube and enjoy this program again after that. Many thanks to everybody who's taken the time to join us this evening. Chris, I'm going to leave that for tonight, and I look forward to catching up with you very, very soon.
Thanks, Ewan.